Growing up, we had a group of family friends who were the sweetest people ever. The parents had one biological daughter and an older son and daughter that they had adopted from the mother's sister, who was an addict and had lost custody of the kids. We went on family camping trips and vacations with them, and they're still family friends to this day. The older adopted daughter was a gorgeous blonde girl in my brother's grade, 22 at the time. She liked to go raving and partying and experimented with club drugs, but had no serious addictions to my knowledge. The adopted brother at some point gatewayed from being a stoner to a full-on heroin addict, while the younger biological daughter was a kind of shy, good girl type. The oldest daughter, let's call her Claire, decided to take a road trip with some friends for a skiing trip. After the skiing trip was over, she was offered a ride back home from one of her friends, who was a notoriously bad driver, so she declined and opted to find a ride from somebody else. When that friend drove home that night, he got into a fatal car wreck. Devastated, her and her friends ended up planning to drive down to his funeral and wake services, and on the drive over there, they drove off the road and flipped their car, and getting into a huge and fiery car crash. When the police arrived at the scene, they investigated the crash and explained that a spark had ignited the gas tank, causing the explosive fire. They said that this is an incredibly rare occurrence. While the car was flipped, the driver, who happened to be deeply in love with Allison, was able to escape from the driver's seat, while Allison, who was knocked unconscious and stuck in her seatbelt, most likely burned to death in the blaze despite his best efforts to save her. My brother used to say that her death was inevitable and meant to be, which I personally think is kind of messed up. But the concept of avoiding death one night and then dying in another car crash immediately after is a terrifying idea that is either a freak coincidence or something more supernatural, driven by destiny. Not sure where I stand on this, but the story has stuck with me ever since. It is also an example of an adopted child born from a mother who was addicted to drugs while pregnant, and the genetic predisposition for drug use that is innate in the children that result from that pregnancy. I had just started working the night shift at Walmart, stocking shelves and helping the customers with their purchases. At first, everything seemed pretty normal. The store was quiet, with only a few customers browsing the aisles. But as the night wore on, things started to get strange. I began to notice strange sounds and other things moving along the walls, and I thought that I heard whispers coming from the empty aisles. It was like there was something in the store with me, something that didn't belong. I tried to brush it off, thinking that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then things started to get even more bizarre. The products on these shelves were beginning to move on their own, shifting and sliding as if being pushed from behind. Again, I tried to ignore it, thinking that maybe it was just a prank being played on me by one of my coworkers. I mean, I was the new guy. But when I tried to call out to them, there was no answer. It was like I was the only one in the store. And that's when I heard the footsteps. They were heavy, like somebody wearing work boots, and they were getting closer and closer. I tried to hide, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I peeked around the corner of one of the aisles and saw a figure in a hoodie and jeans, their face obscured. They were walking towards me slowly but steadily, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. The figure was getting closer, and I knew inside that I was in danger. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went quiet. I looked around, confused and disoriented. The figure was gone, and the store was once again quiet. I thought that maybe I was just kind of losing it. First night on the job, and my nerves were a little high, and I was just tired and overworked. But then I saw the blood. It was smeared on the floor in the aisles, leading off into the darkness of the store. I didn't know what to do, so I followed it, thinking that somebody was hurt. My heart racing until I came to a small room in the back of the store. Inside, I found something that I'll never forget. The hooded figure from before was standing in the darkness of the room, covered in blood. As soon as I saw him, I freaked out and turned tail and booked it back through the store. Initially, I didn't know where I was running to, but I decided towards the employee lounge. It had to be safe. As I was rounding the final aisle to make it there, I nearly jumped out of my skin as a loud scream erupted in front of me. There stood a group of my beloved coworkers, all completely losing it and beside themselves. It felt like they laughed for over 10 minutes straight, and I didn't know what to do but kind of join in as well. After I settled down and refrained from wanting to kill them, I was told that this was just part of the gig, and that every new employee had their initiation. Honestly, I don't really know what to think about all of this. In hindsight, it was all in good fun, but at the time, it scared the crap out of me. I'm guessing around 7 years ago, my older brother and several of his friends went on a camping trip in rural Maine. When they drove up there, they decided to stay in a random motel nearby these skiing trails. He said that it looked pretty run down and sketchy, but being college kids at the time, they didn't care much and they just wanted a cheap place to stay for the night. After a fun day of skiing, they got some drinks at a local bar and headed back to the motel to get some rest. As they were all hanging out and winding down in their motel room, my brother opened up a desk drawer to store some of his things in, and what he found inside the drawer made his jaw drop in horror. There was a coiled Ethernet cord with dried blood all over it. As if this discovery wasn't terrifying enough, about an hour later, all the lights turned off all of a sudden. My brother walked outside and saw that there wasn't a single light on in the motel. He went to the front desk and the guy working there explained that the power had went out. It was nighttime at this point, so everything was completely pitch black. My brother spent the rest of the night awake and scared out of his mind. The power didn't turn back on until the next morning. My brother took a photo of the bloody Ethernet cord, but sadly, I just texted him asking if he still had the photo and he can't find it on his phone or on the iCloud. I really wish I could have shared the photo here because it is truly shocking to see. From the look of it, I can imagine somebody was brutally strangled in the room that he was staying in. I also think it's pretty stupid that he didn't call the police and fill out a report about this. Memorial Day 2015. My boyfriend at the time and I got an invitation to meet up with some friends who were hanging out at a marina just outside of the city that we lived in. The marina wasn't in the best neighborhood, but the friends that we were meeting and hung out at this spot on the banks of the river a few times before to go camping and canoeing. I had heard from my friends about how the last time they partied here, a guy who had just gotten out of prison ended up joining their campfire, and how it had made for a great story. They had all laughed about it, and it became something of a group inside joke. Tyrone asking them to play Wonderwall on the guitar all night. At every party that I would hear about it, "Hey, remember that time at the marina, Tyrone? Blah blah blah." Everybody would reminisce and cut up about how hilarious the night was. It became somewhat of a tradition for them to go to this place on summer holidays to enjoy the water and the surrounding nature. Feeling invincible and that nothing bad would happen to us, we decided to join up with our 3 friends for the night. That was sure to be a good story for future parties. And we did get a story to tell, but it wasn't lighthearted like singing campfire songs with a convict. It was something darker, something that we would only talk about in hushed voices at parties after we had had a few, and could brave bringing the memory back to light. It was already dark by the time that we drove the 20 minutes out of the city to meet up with them. Honestly, I was in a sour mood because I had to work early the next morning and I didn't want to be out late. Why we hadn't left hours previously to meet them is beyond me. Knowing that my boyfriend, myself, and our crew of friends We'd end up drinking on the riverbank until we were too drunk to drive home, fall asleep outside, and my phone would die. My alarm wouldn't go off, and I'd miss work and get in big trouble. I remember standing in the parking lot once we had arrived and feeling extremely unsettled. I was pouting against the truck of my boyfriend's car and giving him a stern talk, saying, "We can't be out here too late. I have to work tomorrow. If we end up camping here tonight, I'm going to be pissed. I don't even want to be here right now." But since he was the one who had driven us out there and was looking forward to hanging out with friends, I didn't push it. He promised that we wouldn't be out late and that he wouldn't get drunk. I almost demanded that he take me home right then because I felt so uncomfortable being there, but I didn't want to ruin our entire night. At the time, I chalked it up to being in a bad mood and acting like a Debbie Downer. But what ended up happening later told me that I should have listened to my instincts and gotten the heck out of there ASAP. The marina is essentially just a big parking lot with a couple boat launches and a pathway that went into the surrounding woods around the river. It was isolated, poorly lit, and since it was a long holiday weekend, all types of people were out partying in the woods. There were at least 4 other cars in the lot, one of which was our friend's car. We unpacked the car and started walking through the woods on a narrow path with a 6-pack of beer and our phone flashlights to see in the darkness. Our friends were already out on the riverbank with their canoe and they had texted us their location. My boyfriend had also been there before, so I followed his lead. After a few minutes of walking into the woods, we heard 2 guys behind us talking in a slurred speech to each other, saying something to us like, "You guys having a good night?" We assumed that they were just wasted and laughed, responding, "Oh yeah, we're just getting started." They mumbled more to each other incoherently and went off on a different path into the woods with their flashlight. We didn't get a good look at them, but I remember they were wearing gym shorts and cut-off muscle shirts. It had startled me a bit because they seemed to have come out of nowhere, but they didn't seem threatening. We brushed it off and weren't concerned that we had run into other people since we knew we weren't the only ones on the marina. Now it seems that they could have been stalking our movements over the course of the evening because of what was to follow. I'll try to explain the landscape a little more for details that'll be relevant later on. We were directly on a rocky riverbank, so to our one side was water and to our backs was the woods. We had entered the woods from the left end of the parking lot, if you were facing the river, and took a path that eventually forked in the middle. Once you reached the fork, by going down the right path about 50 feet or so, you wound up at our campsite and the riverbank. If you stayed straight on the path, you went deeper into the woods until the path met some fallen trees, really overgrown brush, and it ended. The spot that we had picked had a large, flat, open embankment, but further up, the path pretty much just dropped off into the water, as it was on a steeper part of the hillside. It seemed to us at the time that there was one way in and one way out of the area, and that anyone who went up the path essentially had to walk past where we were all sitting. I'm sure there were other small paths around since the woods weren't super thick, but the one that we took to the water was clearly walked on frequently and often. Finally, we had reached our friends who had laid out a blanket and had already cracked open some beers. We had all intended to row out to a nearby island with the canoe, but we had noticed that some people already had set up camp at that spot and could see their campfire from the shore. Oh well, we figured this was just as good a spot as any to enjoy our evening, and we weren't miffed about the change of plans. We started to relax, had a drink ourselves and smoked some cigarettes, and then talked about starting a fire to keep warm in the cool evening. We gathered some firewood from nearby and explored the path a bit more, not running into any more people for the time being. After we had started a fire and settled in for the night, I tried to cheer up and get out of my crappy mood and enjoy the company of my friends. It was difficult though. I found myself staring down the path and jumping at every little sound or twig cracking in the distance. The guys weren't paying much attention to the surroundings and were talking loudly. They were in their own world. At one point, I distinctly remember my friend's girlfriend leaning over me and saying, "Do you have a weird feeling about tonight? I just feel like something bad is going to happen." It freaked me out because I knew exactly what she was talking about. No matter how many beers I had or how much I tried to distract myself with light conversation, something about the night just felt off. It's like the air was full of electricity and danger. A few minutes later, a group of about 5 men aged 20 to 25 appeared out of the tall weeds and started towards our fire. I could see them squinting in our direction when one of them said, "Is this Joe's party?" I made out some silhouettes of the figures in gym shorts, but I couldn't discern any physical features because of the way the campfire was casting shadows around the trees. They had plastic bags in their hands, which I assumed were full of towels or after-swimming clothes. We all said, No, you got the wrong group." They apologized for bothering us, wished us a good evening, and started back the way that they came. It seemed then that their group split off into 2 different parties though, because after the interaction, 3 of the guys stayed close by the tree line, trying to kick over a stump in the ground, making a ruckus, and 2 more had gone up further up the riverbank with their flashlights. I could see the light dancing off the tree branches in the water, but having walked farther up the path earlier with my boyfriend for firewood, I remembered that the path had turned into a dead end. I waited for the light to start coming back toward our campsite, or the group to walk back to us, heading back toward the parking lot, but they never passed by us again. The 3 guys messing with the stump left after a while, and I figured they went to go find Joe. The flashlight beam disappeared from view, and I stopped thinking about it, turning my attention back to my friends. About 20 minutes passed when our conversation was broken by something that made us all go dead silent. Suddenly, we hear a man about 75 feet away yell loudly, "Hey, what are you doing, man?" And then a sort of shuffle of feet and movement. "Hey, get away from me," he yelled. "What do you think you're doing?" And the sound of something making contact with skin. "No, stop." I could hear a struggle taking place. "Help, somebody help me," followed over and over and over. It then dissolved into what sounded like somebody being attacked. We heard something hitting something, maybe a fist in the man's body and maybe a blunt weapon or a knife, as he screamed for help. We only heard his voice as the assailant seemed to have surprised the guy and began attacking him without saying anything. He yelled in agony for what seemed like forever until he finally went silent. You could hear his voice weakening. His groaning faded as it seemed he went unconscious or worse. I can never unhear the sound of it to this day. My friend yelled into the distance, "Yo, what the heck?" And it brought us all back to reality. Whatever had just happened, it happened just beyond where we were sitting. We had a small fire burning, and we were very clearly visible from the tree line, and 5 of us had just witnessed somebody being brutally attacked. The rushes and weeds near us started rustling as all chaos broke out on our campsite. We had to leave the area and fast, but we were cornered. We stood up, grabbing bags, shoes, only what was necessary and within reach, and we got ready to run. Someone doused the fire. We couldn't take the pass since that was likely where the attack had just taken place, and somebody was probably about to burst into our campsite and ambush us. I didn't dare look behind me. The canoe, it was the only way out. We started pushing it out into the water in a panic. I got in first, uncontrollably shaking and sobbing. My boyfriend had sense enough to grab my purse and handed it to me, as he helped my hand get the canoe far enough away from the shore so we could push off. My friend's girlfriend was holding me, trying to calm me down, but I was too afraid to move or speak. Everybody else was silent with straight fear written all over their faces. With 5 grown adults in a small canoe, all I could picture was the boat capsizing, or somebody picking us off from shore with a gun. We paddled out into the middle of the river and watched our campsite disappear around the bend. Once we felt out of threat of immediate danger, I called 911 from the boat and shakily told the police what we think had just happened. The cop on the line was impatient and tense, only saying that they had already gotten a call about the situation, and he had hung up on me. As we floated down the river, the boat launch in the marina came into view. We could see from the water that the parking lot was alive with ambulances and police cars. We hurriedly had docked the boat and climbed out, carrying the canoe up the ramp. No one stopped us to ask any questions or even noticed us, a frightened group of hippies conspicuously dragging a canoe behind them. I saw some cops walking down the pathway that led to the river with flashlights, but they weren't moving with any sense of urgency. A couple guys were talking with officers at the ambulance with their shirts off, wearing gym shorts or swim trunks, but we couldn't tell if it was members of the group that had walked by our campsite, claiming to be looking for Joe. But I assumed they had to have been since the incident happened shortly after we had all crossed paths. Strangely, no one appeared to be injured. The ambulance cab was empty. No one was in handcuffs and everybody just seemed to be talking calmly. Something was off, but we didn't stick around to find out if they had found anything in the woods. We looked for news stories for weeks after the fact and found nothing about the incident. No victim, no attacker, nothing. Were we in the wrong place at the wrong time? What happened to the guy who was attacked, or was he faking it all just to mess with us? We were almost victimized by a group of dangerous youth that had scoped us out, seeing us as an easy target. We speculated that this could have been an attempt to lure us into the woods, to jump us, among many other possibilities. But we never had any answers about what had happened in the woods that night. The next day, some of the group went back to gather up supplies that we had left behind in our panic. They didn't find anything stolen or strange in the path near where this had happened. I have never been back to the marina, and that group of friends has since dissolved and moved off to different parts of the world. We had went out looking for an evening of fun and got more than we had bargained for. I was personally traumatized for weeks. Any sudden noises or surprises sent me into a fit of panic, sobs and shaking. Eventually, I was able to stop hearing a man scream for his life every time that I closed my eyes.